So let's talk about your general view of what government ought to do. So what makes you a liberal in sort of not the classical liberal sense where we agree, but the part where we disagree? What do you think government ought to do?
Well, it should be as small as possible, right? I don't believe in massive government, sprawling government agencies with lots of people doing jobs you're not quite sure what they're doing, soaking up public expenditure. I think government should be responsible. It should take action, even if it's against the popular will of the people. You're made to be a government because people expect you to take difficult decisions and to govern. And the example I would use is someone like Margaret Thatcher in Britain. And I would compare her to the other female prime minister, we had Theresa May. Margaret Thatcher was prepared to make difficult, tough decisions. She was a conservative, but Theresa May wasn't. She just wanted to please everybody. I don't believe in people-pleasing governments. I believe you are elected by the people. You should live up as far as possible to the manifesto that you ran on. And I think Trump, to his credit, has basically delivered on most of the things he said he would deliver on. And he certainly tried to. You couldn't argue that he's been elected and done a completely different thing. So I think that's a central part of government, is to do whatever the administration that's been elected has decided it wants to do. That's why they got elected. Doing what the people have elected you to do is important in democracy. So I believe in that. I don't believe in a nanny state, except to the point where the public can sometimes be too stupid for its own good. Do I think that government should occasionally interfere in the well-being of the people? Yes, I do, actually.
So where do you draw the lines around that? What's the limiting principle when it comes to, because people are very often quite stupid, as it turns out,
yeah.
and if you're on the right, you think that's the left, and if you're on the left, you think that's the right. But the truth is that in personal habits, people make lots of mistakes, make lots of bad decisions. Where do you draw the line around where is the government's role in bettering people's lives? Because I think this is a fundamental distinction between liberal and conservative.
Take cigarette smoking, right? Most smokers knew it was bad for them, right? They know it's bad, cigarette smoking, but they want the right to smoke, right? It's not a constitutional right, but they want to have the right to smoke. It's my life. Fine, okay, it's your life. But actually what has happened in countries like Britain and America in the last 20 years is you don't now go into a bar and be full of smoke if you don't want it to be. That to me seemed to be sensible government. Yes, you are impinging on the right of a civilian to lead the life they want to lead, which is to walk into a bar and have a cigarette at the bar. But actually, if most people in that bar don't want to have a cigarette, why should they be subjected to unhealthy smoke from you in the way that they were being? Now, is that nanny state by government to ban smoking from public places? I would think it was the right thing to do. I'm a non-smoker, though. I smoke the odd cigar. But most smokers I know actually shrugged their shoulders and kind of accepted it. And there's a kind of template there, I would argue, Mr. Shapiro, for the gun debate, which we haven't had yet, but I'm sure we're coming to, which is at what point does the safety and the health of a lot of people get dictated to by a group of other people? At what point do you bring them together? At what point do you try and reach a consensus where the smokers can still smoke or they can still have a gun, but actually what they can't do is go into a bar and shoot it up? And how do you stop them doing it? It's a fundamental question for the public health of the country. And treating guns like a public health issue would be a really smart move for America right now. It might take the politics out of it, which has become so vicious and polarizing. In Glasgow and Scotland, they had a huge problem with knife crime. A lot of knife murders, young kids, mainly white kids, stabbing each other. So they treated it like a public health debate. And they've massively reduced knife crime in Scotland, which has been great. So, nanny state to a point. I believe in people's fundamental freedoms, but the cigarette debate to me was an interesting one. Drink driving was an interesting debate in America, wasn't it? You go back 50 years, you could get in your car and have a few drinks and drive around. And then Mothers Against Drink Driving, MAD I think they were called, rose up after a particularly heinous drink driving incident, and they affected real change. And now you can't do that. Now, there will be people who still think, I want to have a few beers and have a drive. Okay, but you can't, actually, because you might kill people. And they have as much right to not be killed as you do to get in your car with a few drinks.
It's fascinating to go a little bit beneath the surface on this debate, because I think that the debate here is really about externalities, meaning that the reason that we have laws about not smoking in public places, and there you'd have to distinguish for me even between public parks, which are run by the government, and public establishments, which are run by private business owners. So in my view, the government actually shouldn't be involved in that. If a private business owner wants to have a successful business, they will stop people from smoking in their business in most cases because they're going to lose business because most people don't smoke, and it's annoying to have people smoke there. But take the drunk driving example. It's a better example. So the drunk driving, obviously there are obvious externalities to people weaving all over the road. And the way that you actually police drunk driving is by pulling somebody over who is weaving all over the road and driving recklessly. So you could theoretically have a crime defined as reckless driving without the actual drink being a part of it per se, because if you drink in your home.
But fundamentally, and again, this comes back to the guns debate for me, right? Fundamentally, you want to stop people getting in their car drunk. That's really what you want. You want to affect a cultural change in thinking. And the undeniable reality is that a far smaller percentage of Americans now get into a car under the influence of alcohol than used to because of the effect of that campaigning. And most Americans accept that. America, you've got to remember, one of my sort of strange things about the gun debate was that America's probably one of the most regulated countries on earth in so many ways. If I want to buy a car, I couldn't believe the amount of paperwork I had to do. If I wanted to buy a pet dog, my God, I mean, you're there all day. In other words, my 21, it's now 26, but my 21-year-old son at the time, 6'2", long hair and a beard, with his mate, who's the same. Took them to Gladstone's in Malibu for a lunch. And they wanted a non-alcoholic beer. And they got refused because they didn't have their ID on them. A non-alcoholic beer, because it has 0.001% alcohol in it. I didn't even know that. And when I asked them to explain why, they went, yeah, I'm afraid that's the problem. They can't prove they're 21, and you have to be 21 even to have a non-alcoholic beer. The same month up in Arizona, an 8-year-old girl went to a Bullets and Burgers, had her burger, then went to the range, was handed by a former Marine a load of firearms, loaded, fired them, eventually got handed an Uzi submachine gun, fired 2 bullets, then lost control and shot the instructor in the head and killed him. A terrible tragedy. She will never get over that, I'm sure. Her parents were videoing it on their phone, and you see them suddenly lose control of the phone. They won't get over it. The guy's dead. His family won't get over it. What I won't get over is the extraordinary disparity between this draconian ruling on my son, age 22, to have a non-alcoholic beer in LA, and this 8-year-old girl. I have a 7-year-old girl now. An 8-year-old girl being able to fire an Uzi machine gun, submachine gun, loaded at a gun range, and that remains legal because it's her constitutional right to do that. That's where I have a problem. It's more the disparity of the way that America regulates these things.
Well, I think that the real question there is criminalizing recklessness, meaning that it's a weird thing to criminalize a 21-year-old drinking a non-alcoholic beer.
Right.
And in the other case, obviously, I would think that it should be criminal recklessness to hand an 8-year-old girl a gun she's not capable of controlling, and that would be chargeable, in my view, just under probably basic negligence.
But it wasn't.
Laws. I mean, I don't know a particular case, but in my view, that should be, although not necessarily as an effect of banning guns per se, because as we've discussed now several times, I think that the countervailing view is that there are lots of law-abiding citizens who do want to be able to own a gun and should be able to own a gun.
I understand why Americans want to defend themselves. In a country with 330 million guns, I understand why Americans, I've heard Bill Maher say he has a gun, right? Because he knows he has threats and he knows that they may come with guns. The country's awash with guns. What I don't get, and this is the same debate we had before, but let me make it probably a simpler debate for the purposes of this, which is there has been an undeniable increase in the number of massacres. I'm not talking about shootings of 2-3 people. Mass shootings on a grandiose, horrific scale in the last 20 years. They are accelerating for whatever reason. And the firepower that's being used is ferocious. The guy in Dayton, in Ohio recently, he was shot dead within 24 seconds of firing his first bullet. But because he had an AK-47, he was able to get off, I think, 41 rounds and hit 26 people, maybe more, of whom 9 died. And at that point, I'm like, okay, surely, if you're concerned about gun safety, and you fundamentally believe in the principle of regulation, you have it in every other part of your life, right? You have it in every part of your life. You also accept, I presume, machine guns are banned, right? Automatic weapons are banned, right? So you've accepted regulation on guns. So I say, well, why can't you go a step further now? Accept that the preferred weapon of choice of almost every one of these massacre shooters, they all use these rifles.
But that is the countervailing question, is whether what we are actually doing here is reverse engineering the regulation by focusing in on the mass shootings, meaning that every year in the United States, approximately 400 people are killed with rifles, approximately 1,600 people are killed with knives, about 30,000 people die of handgun wounds. Many of those are suicides. So are we focusing in on the mass shootings because we are focusing in on the rifles, or are we focusing on the rifles because we are focusing in on the mass shootings? Why not just go for a full gun ban, in other words? So
I don't propose a gun ban. I accept there are too many guns in circulation. It's not like Australia, where they, after the Hobart massacre in the mid-90s, they banned almost all guns from civilian
Even then,
circulation.
only 1/3 of guns were turned in the Australian gun buyback. And
but that's a lot of guns.
It's certainly a lot of guns.
The equivalent here would be 110 million guns.
100%. I mean, the murder rate in America went down faster after the Hobart
I know all the numbers.
gun ban, and our gun supply increased.
Sure,
obviously.
you and I, we can argue the details.
Yeah, we can do a whole other hour about this.
There's a bigger thing, which is a cultural response to these kind of massacres. I found it extraordinary that after Sandy Hook, when 20 young first graders are literally blown to pieces in their classroom, that America, the #1 superpower in the world, was incapable of coming together and finding a unified response to try and prevent that happening again, of any kind. In Britain, we had a direct equivalent of Dunblane in Scotland. But there was a cultural reaction from Britain, from left and right, it was never political at all, that after 16 children were killed in Dunblane in Scotland in a similar attack by a lone gunman, that something fundamentally had to change. And we were very draconian, as you know. We banned almost all guns from civilian circulation. Interesting thing happened. For 5 years, gun crime ticked up a bit, actually. And then they said, okay, we need to make it more punitive. So now it's a 5-year mandatory prison sentence if you're caught with one of these guns. And ever since that moment, gun crime has gone down. We have other issues in Britain, like knife crime, very serious problems with knife crime. And the reaction from the British is the same. We've got to stop this. What can we do? Let's limit the amount of knives. Let's make it draconian to carry a knife in the street. In other words, our reaction to knife crime epidemic now is the same as our reaction to gun crime, which is we can't allow this to continue. Let's bring in laws to change it. And it's not left and right arguing about it. The three things that I've always tried to campaign for here. Universal background checks. I don't think you're against that.
Not in concept, although if it does end with a massive government gun registry, I have a problem.
Right, and I understand why, because that comes back to the threat of tyranny and everything else, right? I get that. But I've always campaigned for that. I think there should be a limit on all magazines of 10 bullets. I don't understand why anyone would need more. You don't need it for hunting. You don't need for sports shooting. You can do that. And in Britain, if you want a sports shoot, you have a license. Why can't you have that here? And thirdly, I don't see a need in the same way that the only possible need for a machine gun is to kill lots of people very quickly. I think that has now become the preferred way of using one of these assault rifles. And I don't understand why the argument against machine guns is this, and the argument against these assault rifles is a different argument. To me, it's the same thing. You're just extending common sense.
So are you talking about a ban on the sale of ARs and so-called assault rifles, which are really all semi-autos? Are you talking about a full confiscation? Because there are 100 million of those in circulation
I think you would try and do what they did in Australia. You would have a buyback. You know, you'd say, look, we are going to try. I know. Good luck, because at the moment people are so entrenched about this, driven by political partisan debate. But actually, I would appeal to the common sense.
Also because you're talking about confiscating 100 million guns on the basis of 400 yearly deaths.
Not confiscating, asking people to give them up.
Well, I mean, unless you're going to punish them.
And you're going to pay them. And you're going to pay them.
Unless you're going to pay 3 times what the going rate is.
Okay.
Nobody's going to turn that in.
But you have to do something, is my point.
Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional leftist tear gleaming in the sunshine? Don't ask me why. That's called science. To take advantage of this amazing opportunity, hit the like button.